Hey there friends, Zabracus here with a follow-up to my last video about the colors and their names in Magic the Gathering. In that video, I discussed the basics of the color combinations and their code names. I had also briefly mentioned that the two color combinations are named after the Guilds of Ravnica. Well, in today's video, we are going to dive into that a little bit more. Now be sure to upvote and subscribe to the channel for updates on new videos and content. You can also watch me play Magic the Gathering Arena live on Twitch, and the link is down below. Alright, so let's get started. Now one thing to keep in mind about Magic the Gathering in general is that there is a lot of history and lore. There's crossover lore with Dungeons and Dragons, there's books, and well, there's just a lot of backstory in general. Now I'm going to go over just some of the basics simply to help beginners and veterans understand what the Guilds of Ravnica are, their characteristics, and why this will help you become a better Magic the Gathering player. And one thing to keep in mind is that Ravnica is one of the many planes in the world of Magic. And most of the power held within this plane is held by the 10 guild packs, each of which have their very own special beliefs and characteristics. Now, what are they? Well, there is the Boros Legion, which is red and white. There's House Dimir, which is blue and black. There's the Selesnya Conclave, which is green and white. There's the Golgari Swarm, which is black and green. The Izzet League, which is blue and red. The Gruul Clans, which are red and green. The Orzhov Syndicate, which is white and black. Simic Combine, which is green and blue. The Cult of Rakdos, which is black and red. And the Azorius Senate, which is white and blue. Now, let's get into a little bit more depth about each of these. So first, we'll go over the Boros Legion, which again is red and white. The Boros Legion is a standing army that protects the Guild Pact and contains the League of Wojek, which are the official peacekeepers of the city of Ravnica. The Boros Legion believes in a higher law, one in which righteousness is fire and justice the light that shines from it. They were originally led by the angel Razia, and the Boros were Ravnica's most formidable military force, and the enforcers of its laws. And its current leader is Aurelia, a ferocious archangel. And the gameplay mechanics for Boros Legion are Radiance, Battalion, and Mentor. Battalion is when this creature and at least 2 other creatures attack, this creature has an added effect. Whether that's +2/+2, or trample, or lifelink, or indestructible, etc. An example would be like Boros Elite. When this creature and at least 2 other creatures attacks, it gains +2/+2 until the end of turn. There's also Radiance, which is an ability word that features on cards that have an effect on a target and all other cards of the same type that share a color with the target. So Mentor is that when a creature with Mentor attacks, you may place a +1/+1 counter on another attacking creature with a lesser power. Now, an example of a Boros Legion card would be Tajik Legion's End. Now, Selesnya Conclave, which is green and white. They promote what is now the strongest nature-based religion of Ravnica, and its led of guards patrol the rural areas along with being conservationists and charity workers. The Conclave considers itself a selfless, nurturing, spiritual congregation, but others regard it more as a brainwashing nature cult, so just kind of a bunch of hippies. The guild is led by a chorus of the Conclave, and it's said that all creatures of Ravnica can hear the songs of the chorus, but only Selesnyans can pick the notes out of the chaos on the city. Now, the guild mechanics for Selesnya Conclave are Convoke and Populate. Convoke means that for each colored mana in this spell's total, you may tap an untapped creature of that color you control rather than pay that mana. And for each generic mana in the spell's total cost, you may tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay that mana. The Convoke ability isn't an additional or an alternative cost, and it only applies after the total cost of the spell with Convoke is determined. To populate means to choose a creature token you control and put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that creature token. If you control no creature tokens, when instructed to populate, then you won't put a token onto the battlefield. An example of a Selesnya card is Amara, Soul of the Accord. Next is the Golgari Swarm, which is black and green. The Golgari believed that you can't truly live until you die. With its vast horde of undead that served as both a standing army and a labor force, the Golgari operated in Ravnica's Undercity, slowly taking over abandoned and derelict areas like a fetid slime mold. The guild leader is Vraska the Gorgon Planeswalker, and the guild is home to Ravnica's topmost necromancers and consists of all sorts of undead creatures. The Golgari's role in the guild pack is to manage waste and also provide free food for Ravnica's poor, which is grown in massive underground farms, right? But the food grown here is typically only consumed as a last resort simply because the farms are fertilized with dead creatures and excrement, which, may not be super appetizing. But although the food may be of questionable origin, the Golgari take pride in being able to clearly show that they are not exclusively devoted to death, but they are, at heart, devoted to life. Now, the guild mechanics are Dredge, Scavenge, and Undergrowth. Cards in the graveyard that have Dredge can be returned to their owner's hand by removing cards from the top of your deck and putting them into your graveyard, aka milling. Now, that'll happen anytime the player draws a card. Doing this replaces the draw. Cards that have Scavenge have the ability that when they go into the graveyard, you may put a number of +1/+1 counters on a creature equal to their printed toughness, not including other +1/+1 counters on it. Cards that have Undergrowth vary in abilities, all of which depend on the amount of creatures that you have in the graveyard. Now, an example of a Golgari card would be Underrealm Lich. Now, House Dimir, which is blue and black. House Dimir is so secretive that only some people knew it ever existed, and many people thought it was extinct. And over the millennia, ghost stories about the Dimir grew more and more complex, telling of ancient undead necromancer advisors, phantasmal assassins, and slick black horrors slithering through the endless mazes of sewers underneath the city. So the Dimir provide illegal but necessary services while openly serving as couriers, investigators, reporters, and archivists. The current guild leader is Lazov, and there are 2 levels of the Dimir. There's the overt level and the covert level. So the overt level is the public face of the guild that people are allowed to see, and the covert level is the ones that Ravnicans suspect exists, but they never, ever see it. So the overt level, they're the ones that often serve as the couriers, the investigators, the reporters, and the archivists. And they serve 2 purposes: to give the rest of Ravnica a friendly face of the guild, and to be street-level eyes and ears of the Dimir. Many entry-level candidates to the Dimir Guild begin as overt agents so that they can prove their trustworthiness. Now, the covert level. The Dimir are a network of agents and spies, assassins, and mind mages. The covert level of the House Dimir uses secret symbols and runes and signals to communicate, often in plain sight of just everyday Ravnicans, right? The covert Dimir also employ various mysterious forms of mind magic, such as telepathic communiques that are erased from memory as soon as the operation is completed. The guild mechanics of House Dimir are Transmute, Cipher, and Surveil. Transmute is that discard this card. Search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost as this card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. But Transmute can only work as a sorcery spell. Cipher is, then you may exile this spell card encoded on a creature you control. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of this card without paying its mana cost. Surveil allows you to look at a certain number of cards from the top of their library and put them into the graveyard or back on top in any order. A card example for Dimir would be Thought Erasure. All right, so next we have the Orzhov Syndicate, which is white and black. Now, the Orzhov Guild was founded on the belief that money is power, that structure breeds wealth, and that guilt creates structure. The guild is run like a combination of religion and credit lending, crime syndicate, all with an ostentatious hierarchy of priests, enforcers, and ghostly counselors ruling over a congregation of guilt-bound servants, such as indebted ghosts and also thralls. The Orzhov Guild is ruled by the Obzedat, a council of ghostly autocrats who have maintained their wealth and power, even though they've shed their mortal forms. Members of the Obzedat are called the Deathless, as they have managed to cheat mortality, maintaining their consciousness and also their greed beyond the threshold of death. Now, to find the Orzhov, the saying went, follow the gold. And they tried to hold this fragile social order in place with a veneer of religious pomp and ritual, although very few actually believed that the Orzhov worshipped any god other than coin. Now, the guild mechanics are Haunt, Extort, and Afterlife. Haunt is when this card is put into a graveyard from play, remove it from the game, haunting target creature. Extort is whenever you cast a spell, you must pay either white or black mana. And if you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. Now, Afterlife. After a creature dies on the battlefield, it leaves behind a 1/1 token creature, which is generally a flying creature. So, an example card for this would be Kaya Orzhov Usurper. So, next we have the Gruul Clans, which are red and green. The Gruul Clans celebrated base urges and lived by instinct, considering all of civilization to be an elaborate cage that suppresses desire. Once a powerful guild, the Gruul were an assemblage of beggars and gangs and raiding parties, with the largest of their gangs being led by the Cyclops Berborgamas. Now, the Gruul don't really have an overarching leader, so if they did, it probably would have been Berborgamas. Now, the Gruul have fallen from their former glory as the keepers of Ravnica's wilds, and are now basically nothing but a loose affiliation of berserker clans who seek to wipe civilization from the plane. And they value the absolute breakdown of society and believe the society has no place in the natural order. The only law that matters in the world to them is the law of nature. And they also believe that instinct should always overpower logic. Now, their guild mechanics are Bloodthirst, Blood Rush, and Riot. Bloodthirst is when creatures with Bloodthirst come into play much stronger, in the form of like a +1/+1 counter. If they were played on a turn in which an opponent took damage. Now, Blood Rush allows a player to discard creature cards in order to give an attacking creature a temporary power or toughness boost equal to the power and toughness of the discarded creature card. Riot allows you to choose between gaining a +1/+1 counter or haste when a creature enters the battlefield. A card example of the Gruul Clans would be Zerta Goblin. Next, we have the Izzet League, which is blue and red. They are responsible for the world's civil engineering works and new magical developments. They are the undisputed masters of spellcraft and inventions on Ravnica. The Izzet were basically rabid inventors fusing elemental magics and technology to power their creations. Basically mad scientists, right? They were led by the capricious and unfathomably brilliant dragon Niv-Mizzet. Yes, I just said a dragon. The Izzet mage rights endlessly created and destroyed, driven simply by that passion for discovery. And the Izzet mechanics are Replicate, Overload, and Jumpstart. Replicate involves putting copies of a given instant or sorcery onto the stack for each time you pay the Replicate cost. Overload provides an alternate, usually more expensive, mana cost for a card which can be used when casting it, and upon doing so increases the whole effect of the card. And then Jumpstart allows the player to play the spell directly from their graveyard for the additional cost of simply discarding a card. An example card of the Izzet League would be Rahl Izzet Viceroy. Now, we have the Azorius Senate, which is white and blue. Now, the Azorius Senate are the police force, legislative, and judicial body of the Ravnican bureaucracy. The Azorius Senate was the primary origin of all the laws in Ravnica, and they believed that their very rigid system of governance kept nearly everything on Ravnica running smoothly. Justice was blind, and that included the Guild's venerable Grand Arbiter, Augustin IV, who some say was blind to Ravnica's most significant problems. But in general, the Azorius Senate worked to create absolute order by placing countless laws and rules to hinder any change to the status quo. Now, the guild mechanics for Azorius Senate are Forecast, Detain, and Addendum. Forecast is an activated ability that a player can only use when the card is in their hand and only during their upkeep. When the individual card does is usually related to what it does normally. Now, Detain. Certain spells and abilities can detain a permanent, and until the next turn of the controller of that spell or ability, that permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. Addendum have additional or alternative effects if you cast a spell during your main phase. Addendum spells are generally mostly found on instants. An example card for Azorius Senate would be Dovin's Veto, or basically any Dovin card at all. The Cult of Rakdos is black and red. The Cult of Rakdos was a thrill-killing, pleasure-seeking cabal led by the ancient demon Rakdos. Even as a force of chaos, the Rakdos were a resource for the law-abiding guilds when the denizens of Ravnica needed an obstacle removed, or, they just needed an unsavory client entertained. The minions of Rakdos were always happy to oblige, and they are considered a necessary evil by some, and are composed of thrill killers who provide, a lot of the heavy labor force. They also do a lot of catering and entertainment of the plane. Now, the cult is headed by Lizolda, the Blood Witch, and every now and then, the cult goes on killing sprees and kills many people in the city, including those of its own guild. Alright, now the guild mechanics are Hellbent, Unleash, and Spectacle. Hellbent can be many things, but the common thing is that it is active when the controller of the card with Hellbent has no cards in their hand. For example, if a Hellbent ability of a permanent is an activated ability, the number of cards in that permanent controller's hand is checked when that player tries to activate the ability. It is not checked when the ability resolves. Unleash is a keyword ability that allows a creature to enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it and stops it from being blocking character if it has that +1/+1 counter on it. Now, Spectacle. You can cast a spell for its Spectacle cost if an opponent lost life during the turn. An example card of Rakdos would be Judith, the Scourge Diva. Now, Simic Combine is green and blue. They provide medical assistance, and they perform biological research. Amidst the chaos of the Ravnican politics and strife, the researchers of the Simic Combine worked industriously to improve their world. The Simic were charged with maintaining nature on Ravnica. And in ever just getting super more awkward and weird ways, the Simic modified nature so that it could survive in a world increasingly blanketed with civilization. Now, the initial leader was Momir Vig, but Vanifar is the current guildmaster. The guild mechanics are graft, evolve, and adapt. Graft works by allowing a creature with graft to move a +1/+1 counter from itself onto a creature that just entered the battlefield. Evolve is when a creature with evolve gains a +1/+1 counter whenever another bigger creature enters the battlefield under the same player's control. Evolve reads, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Now, adapt is where you adapt n, where n is any natural number. So if a creature has no +1/+1 counters on it, you may pay the adapt cost to put n +1/+1 counters on it. And an example card would be Simic Ascendancy. All right, so those are the Guilds of Ravnica, which again just happen to be the names of the dual color combinations in Magic the Gathering. And hopefully you now know a little bit more about these guilds, how they contribute to actual Magic the Gathering gameplay, their mechanics, and maybe just some super weird facts that you can now tout at your next Friday night Magic at your local game store. I don't know. But I hope ultimately you enjoyed this video. Now please upvote and subscribe, and be sure to let me know what kind of Magic content you want to see from me in the future. Just write it down below in the comments. Now this has been a Zabracast, and thank you so much for coming to my nerd house, and until next time, stay geeky.